Good evening, everyone. Let's open up our meeting of the Granby Center Advisory Committee. My name is Marty Schwager, committee member. I will be filling in as chair tonight for Mark and Meg, who are absent tonight. Mark might try to join us. I don't see him on yet, but he is traveling out west. So we have 3 members, so we do have a quorum. It's been a while, especially for me. I don't think I've been to this meeting since October. I was absent in November, so, but I did review the material from November's meeting. So can we have an action on the minutes of the November 25th, 2024 meeting minutes of our group? Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. Second.
Second. Any discussion, questions, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Aye also. So all 3 approve. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is a presentation and update from BFJ. And what I'd like to just ask one thing, or one request, that we take just a little pause between the market study portion and the zoning portion, just so we have time as a committee and well, especially Abby to give kind of an update of where we stand with the revisions and cleanup of the zoning regs that we're kind of currently going through. We may have mentioned it in one of the past meetings, but as we get a little deeper into it, I think it's a good idea that since it's such an integral part and a very important part of this planning process and project in and of itself, I think it's important that we touch upon it, especially when we get into zoning. So we'll ask Abby to do that. So with that, I guess the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
All right.
Thank you.
Just to reintroduce again, I'm Frank Fish, but I think some of you may not remember Thomas, but I just want to reintroduce Thomas Madden because he's here tonight because a key component of tonight's meeting is the market study, to get to that and talk about it. But I think just to introduce also that Jonathan Martin and Suzanne Goldberg are both on by Zoom. So Jonathan intends to be here. They'll be here for the February 26th meeting, and Jonathan will be here for the, and this is perfect in terms of the agenda tonight. If Abby can give that update on zoning, because the next meeting is when Jonathan will be here, and we'll get into zoning and urban design in the center itself. So anyway, my part of this partly is to just remind everybody the back of the agenda is where we are. And we're basically where we had hoped to be. We've got, as you know, from our, oh yeah, there's a nice copy there.
Got it. Okay.
So we are where we had hoped to be, and that is kind of wrapping up task 3. The key to that 3B you see there is the market analysis, regional development trends, and that's what, I think you've all got that from Abby by email, but Thomas is going to summarize it for you all this evening. So we want to sort of get that all done so that we can start discussing with you some preliminary concepts and ideas at the February. I think our next meeting is February 26th. And then we have a follow-up meeting in March. So we hope to get into preliminary ideas with you on the center based on the market study, as we said, the existing conditions, the stakeholder meetings, and our property. Well, I'll get into the property owners meeting that we've had also. And then that'd be the March 26th meeting. also, on that March 26th meeting, to prepare to go over with you everything we'll present, we've got an April 3rd workshop, public workshop. So those are the key dates coming up, February 26th and then March 26th. But we're aiming for that April 3rd workshop. So that's our overall sort of timeline. And I think we're where we want it to be. And we'll just go through it tonight as to, I'm going to first just do, if I can slip to, any questions on timeline, I guess, first. Item 1.
We're good.
Okay, and then I'll just highlight a little bit the property owners meeting. And Abby, feel free to add on, and Jonathan and Suzanne, and you've all got a hard copy of it. This pretty much goes through just, we had a good, I thought it was a good representation of property owners. And we want to have 1 or 2 other meetings. We're trying to meet with person who controls some of the, well,
Yep.
right out here, sorry, some of the property out here. We haven't done that yet, but we're trying to get in touch. And we covered on page 2, there's these sort of generalized, we covered some transportation issues. You know them all. So the property owners also, of course, felt that people speeding by sometimes speed by the whole center also. So speeding is maybe an issue for residents, but it's also an issue for them in terms of the people prefer to drive by. And so we went over the timing. What we've made some, as you know from our past meeting, George Jacomar, our transportation partner, has suggested to the state some timing changes, split phase timing and cycle changes to maybe be able to, you have to move traffic, but you also have to provide for pedestrians a little bit better, is the thinking. So that we went over with them. Their concern as property owners and, owners of building in the center is that many people drive through Granby Center without stopping to explore the area. So that is something that leads to parking. We understand from them that, during the week, there's sufficient parking. But on weekends, it is really more utilized. We were surprised tonight. It's a cold night, windy. We met at the barn. You couldn't get a parking spot. Couldn't get a parking spot. This is Wednesday night in January, and it's cold. And yet, Thomas couldn't get a parking spot. That's, might be unusual, but, that was,
That's normal.
so that's something that, I think parking.
That's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's a great thing to have. Obviously, if you wanted to go over to the post office, you could have gotten parking. But that is one thing about parking that we discussed with the property owners, and that is that were they willing to have unassigned parking and also shared parking. And actually, one of the nice things about Gessler's is the manager of it was at the meeting, and we asked him about the idea that we understood that a lot of people who bike sort of come up here sometimes on weekends, park their cars and use their bikes from here. And he actually said that, as long as the bike racks, put bike racks down at the shopping center, as long as they didn't take up the spaces in front of the store, that's where everyone wants to park. But he said if they were on the other end of the parking lot, actually in the street, that might be okay with him, because those are the least used parking spots. So that was kind of a nice thing for them, I think, for him to say. And so it was something that came out in terms of there's a shared parking. I had 2 here, or 3 at that point. There's a shared parking use in a way. And the other thing we mean by shared parking, if you had, an office or say retail or professional service on the ground floor, you had office on the second floor, or residential on the second floor. Those, if we can, those can really use the same spaces at some times. In other words, the office starts maybe at 8:30, gets over at 4:30. Whereas a residence is driving out. So they're not there during the day, usually. This is not, by the way, this is in general, not all residents. Some residents will be there, they're working remotely or whatever. But the point is, with this type of parking, is not to have assigned parking. For instance, your doctor, the classic to me is, medical office building, Dr. So-and-so, this is his or her spot. No one else can park there. You don't want that because it kills the efficiency of parking. So they sort of, I think they sort of were receptive, I think, to that. And they also did express, see that point there, property owners like to see P&Z have a greater ability to determine parking on a less stringent basis than the current code permits. So, that's something I would expect from property owners and also from, merchants and users, but that'd have to be examined. Because you do have to be a little bit careful with it. Hopefully, if our plan is implemented, your plan, I should say, this is your plan, and it's successful, parking will become a bit tighter. So you do want to make sure on the one hand you have parking that works well. You don't want too much, but you don't want to overpark something, get too much asphalt. But on the other hand, you want to have enough that is enough to meet the needs of the merchants. So, it was a good discussion. We talked about downtown uses. I think that they were pretty. They felt that there was some lack of consistent zoning, and you had, in the committee here, it's mentioned to us before, to look at, and we'll get that out in the zoning, to look at whether there could be one zone for the center. And certainly for the center that, is all enclosed by kind of Route 20, Route 10 and 202, and then Hartford Avenue. That I think we want to get into and look at. And that needs to be cohesive. And then the whole area around it is now a second zone. So we'll get into that. They just felt it was a good idea, actually, to have one zone for the center. And then I did discuss with them the smaller lot idea. And I think when they understood it, they're kind of neutral to okay, yeah, that might make sense, because we did say within, I think what most people perceive as the center, having a multiplicity of small shops might be good. And so we did discuss that. And they also, you can see here that allowing some residential development could increase the presence of people, could enliven the center. I think they were in agreement on that. They liked the idea. Now, of course, they like the idea of higher density. We've got to be very careful with that. It has to work. It's got to be contextual. It's got to fit in to Granby. So we're not talking about, we mentioned, we're not talking about a 6-story building. We're talking about 3 stories, maybe 4. But they were in favor of a range of uses and mixed use, because they think it'll enliven the center. It won't make it a 24-hour center, but it'll enliven it during the day a little bit more than it is now. So that was some responses there. We did talk about some design and ideas and said that we would be getting into that at a later date with you all. We hadn't developed those yet. But they did talk about landscaping, lighting, consistency throughout the center, which it kind of doesn't have. We got into Merchants Way a little bit, how that was developed, and who owns what, and that's they kind of confirmed that the town really doesn't have ownership or very much. Obviously, you own the park, the green. But other than that, the roads sort of driveways, and they're basically private, as we understand it. So that's going to be an issue in how the center develops, I think. They also mentioned they like the idea of the historic character being more, trying to emphasize a New England feel, or keep what there is of that feel. I don't think, right now, I think there's not a real design concept for the center. It's sort of one building after another put there by different people without a consistent design concept. And they like the idea of trying to get some New England feel, sense of it. We talked about the Frontier building, the town green. I'm not suggesting, Frontier is, it's got all equipment in the building, but we like the building. We think it's a good building. And that whole area could be fixed up road. And it needs a conversation with Frontier. But if it could be, Frontier's not reliant on, it gets in from Hartford Avenue. And all we can see there at any given time is one or two vehicles that are parked. And so we think if it were done well, it could be see it almost as an extension of the green. It'd be a building in the green. But to do that, there's got to be an agreement with them.
Right.
And then there was a desire to make the town green, more active community space, which you already use it for certain things. But I think that continued activity, I think that the owners saw as very good. They want that type of thing. So, by the way, one thing I did leave with, and this is perhaps I went through with the property owners a little bit, the ideas on implementation. For instance, Thomas, pretty expert in special services districts because very familiar with one that runs in Stamford where Thomas worked for a long time, and also tax increment financing district. But after the discussion, I left with the idea, the sense that it might be too soon and too much. And so you'll see tonight what we are it's under our zoning implementation on the agenda, and I hit 5. I wanted to just discuss something more that is, I think, in a way, easier to do, and that is a village district. Just a village district. It's something that Connecticut allows. It has state enabling legislation. The first place to do it in Connecticut was Brooklyn. At first I grew up in Hartford, so I said to myself, Brooklyn? I wasn't sure where it was. And, it's a little
Yeah, this is the Brooklyn Fair. What?
Yeah, I've done that. I have to admit, I had to look up
Close
where
down
Route 6 intersected in Brooklyn, and they created a village district. So a village district is something that towns are used to. And what it gives you is better architectural control, design control. And so that's what I got out of the meeting with the developers, to tell you the truth, that they're not ready, I don't think, for this is just an initial, this isn't to say that if the study becomes a real reality and things start happening, and maybe the village district were to happen and it gives you a cohesive design for the whole place, that these other things couldn't happen. But I walked away from the developers meeting with not trying to do too much too soon.
So you mean the property owners?
Property owners, right.
Property owners.
Not the developer,
They
right.
didn't want to look into tip financing.
Yeah, I think it wasn't that they
this point.
didn't want to, but I could get a sense that,
I think there was more confusion than anything.
Yeah.
when you were explaining it.
yeah,
It's a complicated.
it's a complicated, there was a new concept to them, and I think, I don't know, I just walked away with the village district's much easier to understand.
Right.
And a lot of communities do use the village district in Connecticut. It's something that is allowed by state law. We have to be very familiar with it. We review every design, every building that comes in Norwalk in the village districts for design. Whether it's residential in Rowayton on the water, or it's downtown Norwalk. You know, they have these different village districts. So it just gives you an extra design capability at P&Z.
Right.
So that was the property owners meeting. I'd like to just, if I could, give a few minutes to Suzanne. Suzanne, can you hear me okay? Because
Yes, hello, everyone.
The
Can you
first-
hear me?
Yeah, that's great. The first selectman asked for, if I recall from your email, Abby, sort of just a little update on who we've met with, stakeholders. And so I just would like Suzanne to just cover that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. So Frank just outlined our meeting with property owners, and we also met with the Historical Society. And on top of that, we also included in our existing studies memo a summary of the previous engagement you've already done. So I know one of the questions was how those previous efforts are being incorporated into our process as we move forward. And it's a great question, and I think what we keep coming back to is looking at the key themes that came out of that engagement. So we know that there was the Granby Center Advisory Committee. You all hosted a workshop in 2024, had about 150 attendees, members of the public, and it represented different stakeholder groups, residents, organizations, property owners, and they were asked to map the boundaries of what they thought Granby Center was, rate different priorities, sketch various improvement ideas, and provide feedback on the current usage. So it was our impression that the key themes that came out of that workshop were really increasing walkability, inclusive design, sustainability, business connectivity, and beautification. And we also saw that the results of one of the exercises in particular, in which attendees ranked priorities, there was a strong desire for connected, vibrant, pedestrian-centered downtown with diverse offerings and improved social spaces. So I think what I wanted to communicate tonight is that as we move forward and as Jonathan looks into the sign options and as George looks into transportation and Thomas is doing the market study, we keep coming back to those sort of guiding principles of creating connected, beautified, walkable, inclusive design with enhanced social spaces. So I think so far our work is sort of in line and moving in that direction with what we've heard. And we'll obviously obtain more information from the public workshop, but just wanted to make sure we're not losing sight of the previous engagement you've done and how our current work and findings so far align with the priorities that were ranked by the community previously.
Yeah, and I went over again I mean, you've got 4 pages, I think, in the Granby plan, page 40 through 44, and I think it lays out a very good process and a very good set of goals for Granby Center. So I think what we're hearing sort of reinforces that, with only one thing. I also found just before the goals and implementation for Granby Center is a little thing called tax increment financing. I'm not sure that we should go there yet, but it's just a one item that we haven't gotten encouragement back on.
Right.
Yet. So that's sort of where we are, sort of thing. But now I'd like to turn this to Thomas to maybe highlight the market findings. And
Ask you
oh yeah, no,
some
go
more
ahead.
questions
Yes.
before we get to that.
Yes.
So immensely appreciate the 10 property owners that showed up.
Yes.
But that's a small percentage of the number of property owners in the center. Do you have a plan to engage those that were not there?
Well, one plan, we're trying to engage the property owner that's out here. He owns quite a bit of property. The
We
other,
have a meeting on Friday.
oh,
We have a
good.
meeting set up on Friday, so yeah.
Thanks, Suzanne.
That's 11.
Yeah, that's 11. We will have to try to meet with others. What we find in these is, we're also trying to identify, who owns what. We have a map that, but some of them are LLCs. We don't know if they are, and I think that Abby may have a better sense. We always find in a study like this, there's absentee owners. They're not interested in meeting, and we probably won't be able to get everyone, but I think through Abby, we might continue to try to meet with them. We asked the property owners too, if they could get their tenants and get a real wider involvement for the workshop. And we'll do a poster, we'll do all kinds of advertising for the
That's
workshop.
gonna be my next question, is how many of the property owners were actually the tenants? Because I'm always curious
Yeah.
what the difference is
These were
between.
property owners, not the
There was one
Yeah.
who's a tenant, but yeah. Majority of property owners.
Yeah.
Do we know, just looking at it, since the access to the Frontier building is across town land, was there an easement that was done when that building, their driveway goes across the green, technically? So when the road got moved and the green expanded, was there an easement for their driveway? Do we know?
I have to look at the map, John.
That's why, that's
I'm-
the only reason I found it, because I'm looking going like, hey, wait a minute.
I mean, there must be
Yeah.
if the
Just
town road
curious.
used to go through there.
We walked it all around it. My understanding, John, is that they're, at least currently, they're getting access off Hartford Avenue.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's what I'd say, and that access off of Hartford Avenue is not theirs,
Okay. Oh, all right.
so.
Because it would be, there's one, we probably, if we could get a meeting with Frontier, I think it would be worth it.
Absolutely.
As I think that it's a great building, but I think
the
if
bones
we
are good. I
could,
mean, it's
if we could bring the park, if we could if we could have it a building in a park sort of setting, and control that a little bit better. The other thing is, just jotting down Frontier, the other person or people would like to meet with, if it's possible, is whoever bought the gas station next to them. We understand the gas station sold at a significant price. Yeah, and if we could find out that.
We've been wanting to meet with them too
You're
about some other
wanting to meet
issues.
with them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been very, very difficult to connect with them. It's part of a large portfolio of
Oh.
petroleum
Yeah.
gas stations.
Gas station.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it hasn't been easy. But I think in meeting with almost a dozen of the, center property owners, what, maybe I'm asking, go ahead.
Sorry, not to cut you off. Also, some of those property owners own multiple properties in the center, so it's a
Right.
little bit, while the
Well, that's
number
true.
might seem smaller, area-wise, especially one who was in attendance, so I just want to point that out too.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
By the way,
That's kind of where I was going, is how much of the percentage of the core
Thank you.
have you met with?
well, you know what? Well, just
So-
one person, shopping center. I didn't realize that they owned the old Bank of America site across the street. They own the property. Yeah, they own.
vacant piece there,
Vacant
Yeah, and
piece.
CVS.
And CVS, they own, I'm just guessing that it's 15% anyway, maybe 20% of the center, and they were here. So, and then, I always get the name of the, it's in the very nice restaurant, coffee shop, restaurant right on the break.
Grassroots?
Grassroots, thank you, Suzanne. I can never get that. He was here, Grassroots was here. And so there was a good turnout, I thought. And we could map out what they.
That's what I was gonna say, you take
We
your
can map
thoughts,
that
like,
out. And by the
draw it
time
out
we
on the
do,
map.
I bet we have a good percentage,
Significant percentage.
of people. That's a good
So
idea.
if you, yeah, it's just color in the map to see if there's something glaring.
Yeah, right,
That
right.
should be represented, but wasn't.
And Frontier, I've written down, I'll see if you have looked on the, is it Mamico gas station? Anyway, the gas station, that's all for. So if you ever do get us, maybe we could attend or talk to them. But it's a big corporate probably, and they're gonna run it as a gas station. So there's not much we're gonna be able to do with that type of property. Okay.
John, anything else?
No,
You're
those
good?
were I have another one related to zoning, but I'll hold that to. the
Oh,
zoning
okay, yeah, we'll get into
conversation.
zoning, yeah. All right,
All
well,
right,
Thomas, can give you our overview of the, and everyone has this, let me just hand you the, why don't you highlight it first, and
All
then
right.
Thomas, I'll hand it out to
So,
everybody.
The market report right now, this is draft, okay? This is not a finalized market report, there's no pictures in it. The all my footnotes for moving pictures around and all that stuff. Doesn't have the tables in it. It was just a straight, I wanted to give you a Word doc and basically allow you to go through it, ask any questions. Is there anything else I may have missed? Is there anything else that you want me to look into now before I finalize it? Because once it's finalized, then that helps us out when we actually go into the design side of everything that we need. So part of what I want to, hopefully everyone is just quickly review it, say, okay, the methodology, is there anything else, like I said, within this itself. If we want, if we can bring up my presentation.
Oh, says the host disabled screen sharing.
We got it. All right, perfect. So, just next slide. All right. So I'm going to go through just a quick sort of 3-slide introduction here. We are going to talk a little bit about what I saw in the retail market insights, the commercial market trends, and the residential market insights, which is outlined within the report and people we talked to and property owners. I'm going to go into a little bit about the infrastructure development because we did talk about that at the property owners meeting. But you had a great study that was done by Ty and Bond, which really outlaid a lot of things that we have to take into account as you start to redevelop anything on the site itself. Finally, where does this whole center sort of sit in the community and regional side of everything? Because we had one question is, why did I look at Windsor? Well, it's because you have sub-markets around us. And when a real estate agent goes and looks at comps, as we call it, for rentals and everything else, that's what you're looking at, is the sub-market all the way around us. And it actually goes all the way up to Massachusetts. That's within really a 20-mile radius all the way around it. So that's what, when you look at the community regional impacts, that's your sort of your area that you're drawing from. Typically what we do is we define it as a gravity model and sort of analyze the amount of people that have come from that 20-mile radius into what you're actually having within this area here. Lastly, it's just some quick recommendations, sort of next steps, and then I'm happy to go into sort of a Q&A. So next slide. This map's getting fixed up because we changed the boundaries on it, but your existing zoning on this, and this really dictates your market when it comes to both the retail, the commercial, and the housing all the way around. You have the commercial commons, which has the residential portion of it. You have the commercial center, which is what, potentially looking at changes to that zoning within there. And then you have like the CE zone, which is the center edge, and what changes need to happen within that area as well, because you've expanded the boundaries out. But all of this really dictates the market that you are having within Granby Center, because that allows your uses, your setbacks, your typical Euclidean zoning. When you sort of stretch it out and you sort of see that first slide right there, it really is, you have two sort of center areas. You have it to the north, which has some small retail, housing, and things like that. And then going into Granby Center, and then as you start to spread out, now we get into our submarkets, okay? So the context that, as we started to look at this really was, this is more village center. And how do we service this as a village center compared to, are we servicing a much larger market in there? Just next slide. So the next slide, this is the land use summary that we initially did and we showed you guys as part of our existing summary, but it's really important, I just wanted to repoint this back out again, is when you start to look at the totals in there. What is, commercial, approximately 577,000 square feet, which is about 13% total area, or 13 acres, total area is 22%. Multifamily residential, 23%. You look at the retail, which is 5.6 acres at 9%, mixed use at 2.86 at 5%, and then office at 0.47 acres, roughly about 1%. And so part of that analysis is really dictated, again, when you look back at that zoning, here's what the allowed uses are, which defines your market of what you're having in there. So as we start to look at the design concepts that Jonathan is going to go into and maybe suggest changes to zoning, That may change over the next couple of years as you start to bring in that different types of development that we could potentially look at in that design that Jonathan does, as well as the transportation side of everything and improvements that you will need to bring in that George is going to look at. Next slide. So the next slide here is the existing property owners, and I put this back in here because you have different LLCs, even though a couple of the property owners are the same people, they're just under different LLCs. Okay, so when we first showed this and when we met with the property owners our last meeting here, we found out with Granby Holdings, well, they own the shopping center, but then RESG Properties LLC owns that little vacant piece next to it, but it's the same owner.
Right.
So again, as we start to reach out, and as Frank was saying, we have, a lot of property owners within there that we don't have to do a huge reach out because they're already sort of getting on board with really what's happening here. But, like I said, with that, we have to do some additional reach out because we did get, Abby sent us some stuff just on revised plot plan that was for the residential on the north side of everything, and to reach out just to them. So next slide. So as we started to look at the retail market, just the insights alone, you have some key vacancies that are located in there. You've got a large, at the shop center right here, you've got a large vacant store that's been vacant for quite a while. You have the Bank of America, and then you have some smaller ones, Kessler's Plaza, and then you've got the gas station which just sold, and then some minor office space that is vacant as you go down, just outside the center. So, when you look at the retail trends, comparative market, you're fairly cheap, $15 to $18 a square foot is what I was finding when I talked to the real estate agents and the owners. And it's really actually more affordable than towns like Simsbury nearby because that's at a higher rental rate, of $20 per square foot. So you do have a competitive advantage in here. But when you look at Simsbury, they are drawing from a much larger area, same with Windsor, so that's why it commands a little bit more in terms of that dollar square footage. Okay. The competition, and this is where, when we were looking at what was happening in Avon, Simsbury, you have sort of a larger shopping mall down in Simsbury with the Stop and Shop and everything else right down that way. You have everything that is now happening on East Granby, which is actually serving parts of Windsor, and all of the Amazon and people that are coming in there. And so you have competition that is already starting to spring up in redevelopment surrounding you. What does that mean for you? Well, there's opportunities. And this is where, as part of the redevelopment, this is where you can really lean into your village commercial and the type of shops that you may want to be trying to attract here. So one of the things we talked about, the need for a really good bakery, boutiques, really to differentiate Granby Center from all the other surrounding areas and lean into that service side of Granby compared to the destination marketing or destination retailing that you see in a lot of the other places. The challenge though, and when you start to look at the surrounding areas, is it's a limited diversity in retail offering. So again, part of this goes back into some of the recommendations I'm making is in terms of how you actually market this and working with your real estate agents on marketing Granby Center and then working with the property owners to market those sites and say, hey, this is what we've heard from the people, and this is sort of things that we are looking for within the area itself. Next slide. So again, looking at the retail space, these are all vacant spaces all the way around us, going up to the Massachusetts border. So there is retail space availability, and then as well, there's some office space availability. And this is all coming from LoopNet here. Again, we don't have a lot, but when you look at the Simsbury, you've got sort of 4 dots over there. East Granby's got a couple, Windsor Locks, down in the Windsor, you have availability in there. So again, it's you want to be picking your markets that you go after, as opposed to just doing that shotgun approach, because you may end up failing as you try to attract either national retailers or anybody else, because like I said, I would be leaning into what currently is working there and talking to the owners, saying, what else do we want to be able to have happen? So next slide is just on our commercial market. When you look at that commercial market, really the trends that I was finding and talking with everybody was, it really serves the local needs, the healthcare providers, the professional services, and I think, like I said during the owners meeting, I counted 7 dentists that we have here. You have like another 3 financial, and then you've got like, what was it? 3 financial, 7 dentists, couple nail places, and it was all personal services. So again, those are a short sort of 5-mile radius that we look at, and that type of service, because that's where people are sort of traveling from. You're not driving 20 miles to get your nails done. It's really that local area that we have here. Vacancies, though, former Bank of America site, that does, it sort of hinders everything because it's a prominent vacancy on a main road with the signs up and everything else. And so part of that is, how quickly you get that rezoned, redeveloped, or finding tenants to come into that. Hard thing with banks is you've got a vault and all sorts of stuff in there. So adaptive reuse of those bank buildings is extremely hard. You may have a complete knockdown rebuild potential on that site, just so you're aware of that. Most banks have been closing their branches around. So if you've followed anything in CT Post or anybody else, we've watched probably about 20 locations get closed, just off the whole People's merger and everything else. So again, everybody's moving online. So again, that's something that, as we discuss in the zoning, you may want to open that up a little bit. Current restrictions, as we did the zoning analysis, really was, it prevents flexible mixed-use development that integrates that retail, office, and residential space. You have unique opportunities within Granby Center, and talking to the owners and the real estate agents, is to really develop some of these vacant properties really into that mixed-use type space, and to have that captured market. And so one of the things we did in Stamford was, as we brought more and more of the apartment buildings in, we had captured audience as they came home from where they were working. They were able to start going to the restaurants and having that captured people right there after work. The nice thing as well is now we have a captured audience, because you've increased the population in that area, to now do shopping on Saturdays and Sundays. So if I come home late, I can grab some quick takeout, or I have a meal prepared, something like that. I can bring it back home and then get all my shopping and personal service on Saturday, Sunday. One of the things that, if you are going to look at that type of redevelopment, and one of the things we did discuss previously at other meetings, was enhanced pedestrian pathways, lighting, shared parking systems. That is absolutely critical to the revitalization. So as you start to look at your zoning itself, you then have to take into account all the other things that will now cascade down as part of any type of redevelopment. But once you start to put those services and amenities in, it makes it actually a much more attractive market to be able to market these spaces, because you have this plan in place that the real estate agents are now going to be able to sort of show off and say, this is where Granby is sort of going, this is why you want to invest in this area. Next slide. So residential market insights, and it was interesting. I looked at Gorman York's study. That was a great study. I was going through, I was starting to put a lot of stuff together, and I found that study. I'm like, oh, this saved me a lot of work, because it was really well done, and I give them props on that one. The big thing that you have to look at is your population has been fairly stagnant. Okay, you are not growing. In fact, you've been declining or just wavering up and down over the last few years. Now, I suspect with the new apartment buildings going in, you'll see a population increase. Hopefully that will outweigh the kids that are moving away and things like that. So again, you have a high ownership rate, 90%. However, with that many people, and when you look at the actual residential market, the number of houses for sale in here, it is very limited. So what you're doing now is you're now limiting renters or young professionals from coming in. And so one of the things we started talking about that redevelopment was, how do you capture them bring them into Granby and then hook them. And so that way they have a starter place to go to, and as they start to look at housing in the area, they've got a rental place, they may be in there 1 or 2 years, but they're trying to find that housing to be in here. And so that's really important. The other thing is when we talk is just affordability. So median housing value was about 310,000. Gross rent roughly was about 13,000. It's going up as you start to look at some of these. I'm going to use my air quotes here, luxury apartments. That's what they call them. It's like saying a leader premier, I guess, in hockey, get to charge a little bit more. But when you actually dive into the census district stat or the census stats, 22% of the households are really cost burden and they're spending over 30% of their income. So if you're looking at just the retail jobs alone in Granby Center, most of these are low paying jobs. So if you're going to develop a workforce to work and increase the retail offerings within Granby, you need to bring in housing because otherwise people are now driving. So they basically commute to get into work at a retail job. You know, when you look at the transit, stuff like that, it's very limited. So you're not grabbing a bus or a lot of the other stuff that normally you would find in a much larger municipality. So again, how do you bring that housing in to address a little bit of that? You know, rental market, developments like Station 280 and the Grand Center, that's really catering to the high income residents. And when you look at the census tracts, you saw that jump up. And that is because, you know, you have rents going as high for a 3 or 4 bedroom up to about $5,000. And so part of that is where do you want that rental line really to fall? So again, it poses that challenge for both the workforce population as you look at that, all the retail around here, and then as well if you're trying to bring young families in. You know, the other thing that looking at the housing study and looking at the census tract data is your population of younger kids. You've been seeing a decrease in your school population. Okay, a lot of what I was noticing in the data was you have people now aging in place. Okay, so you know, kids are now gone. It's a 4-bedroom house. It's paid off. I'm retired. All I have is my taxes now to pay. I love this area. I don't want to move. And so you're not seeing that cyclical side of everything where people are moving in and out and getting replaced. So that's one of the things that we're finding throughout a lot of places in Connecticut and New York, where people are aging in place, and it's actually causing a little bit of the housing shortage because you're not seeing those houses come up every 20 years or so. We're staying on now, you know, they were bought 30 years ago, 35 years ago, 40 years ago. So that's part of it. But it does allow for some unique opportunities to come in. So your infill development potential, the vacant lots at the grocery store or the Bank of America site, or other places within and across the street. So, you know, again, we would not be suggesting 6-story or anything. That is not in character for Granby Center. 3 stories, what you have here, maybe 4, you know, 3.5, 4 stories, things like that. That is more in character of what you're looking at. You know, the other thing that, you know, I recommend is the policies encouraging affordable housing and that diversity in that housing stock is to be able to get people in. If you don't keep bringing people in, you're going to continually to decline. And then what's going to happen is as we look at the people who've retired that boomer age, all of a sudden you're going to have a glut on the market of all these people. And so unless you have people already coming in and establishing themselves within the community, and then I've now got my dentist, my church, my doctor, all that stuff, they're now going to go elsewhere because I cannot find housing within the area. Next slide. So just as part of the market analysis, like I said, just to give you some more context, retail average 18 per square foot, but it varies, depends if it's a restaurant or if you're just doing straight up the pharmacy, stuff like that. Typically, when you see like CVS and those national chains come in, it is a triple net lease that they are paying. So they will pay premium to be out here. However, when you actually do the analysis, I've got a table I put together of the majority of the different little stores in there. You only have really, it's under 10% for chain national in here. A lot of it is mom and pop stuff. So that typically commands a lower rent. And so in order for them to survive, it's really tough. And, you know, one of the things that I talk about and my friends talk about is, you know, just to start up any type of retail shop, it is very hard because you're competing now against Amazon and everybody else in those destinations around us. So it has to be very much a specialized service in that retail to fill that void in this area. And so that's part of your marketing plan, is how do you actually do that. So at Gressler's Market, it was a great example of, you had a pet store in there, which was like a national pet store. And then the two ladies who worked there took it over. They got a little funding from the owner just to continue having them go on. And now it's like it's that small family business again, which is great. And it's a great example of a owner working with tenants to keep that shop filled. But it also now has income for people coming in. And then, you know, he's saying they were doing like 1.2 million a year. That's awesome. That's what you're looking for in terms of that personal service. Office, typically this is about 2,500 square feet. It's about $20 per square foot per year in the area, only because you're talking doctors, lawyers, and that type of personal service. If you're talking nail salons and a couple of, you know, like the stuff like that, that actually drops down. And so they're just quick infill stuff. Industrial in the area, you don't have really industrial here. And I would not recommend industrial here. But just to look at it, you know, when you look at Windsor, East Granby, in that area, Windsor Locks, it's about $12 per square foot, and you're looking anywhere from, you know, 4,000 to 6,000 square foot buildings until you get to the Amazon, which now you're into the 100,000 square foot buildings. Most of the properties are getting developed in Windsor Lock area. They're larger buildings, but you have a lot of vacancies right now. And so I know Windsor, you know, Patrick McMahon he just issued a study to go in and look at the Dale Corporation area, only because they have a lot of vacancies now, because the insurance companies that were located there vacated. And so part of, you know, that was a core portion when you look at the modeling where people were coming from, the reason why they're living over here. So that's one of the things that we looked at. Next slide. So as we start to look at the actual overall infrastructure development, if you're going to do any type of enabling growth, time bond, their Stewart study, you know, that was one of the things that they brought up, was just how much the current daily flow was, and what it's sort of below capacity, but you have that bottleneck of that 10-inch main. And that's something you're going to have to plan for at some point, and to replace it as you send everything down south. So the other thing is managing inflow and infiltration. When we talk about that, that is because pipes are old. So as soon as it rains, you now have groundwater, seepage, and everything else now coming into that system, which could potentially have impacts on overflowing that system. So as you look at that development, any type of development within here, you have to take into account that inflow and infiltration side of everything and replace those pipes, because on a heavy rain occurrence, we have, say, new development coming in, you've now impacted the entire system and may have backups. Okay? So that's part of what we have to look at. Natural gas, it's limited, and, you know, recent developments sort of relying on that propane. You know, there is a big push to go more electric on everything, and it may be something that you can look at in terms of, say, battery storage, solar panel, things like that on site as you start to electrify. But again, you know, you need to collaborate with the natural gas to look at any type of expansion on this. Water supply, again, expansion may be required to support some of the higher density projects based on the time bond study, but there is opportunities here. So again, strategic upgrades in sewer infrastructure, water, to accommodate future growth. Now, this may require having the developer put in some money. So it's not falling back on Granby itself, but that's something you negotiate as part of your exactions for any type of new development, and looking at the incremental changes as you develop home. Lastly is just the enhanced parking and traffic management. to minimize the congestion in Granby Center. That will be really part of where we're leading into as we start to look at what is the redevelopment potential within Granby Center, but how do you start to move that traffic around and parking based upon zoning development. Next slide. So how do you actually leverage your regional advantages? And so, you look at where Granby is located, how close it is to the Massachusetts border, you look at what's happening in Windsor Locks, Simsbury, West Hartford and around. But you have a proximity, so it's not a long drive to get over. And that's where people, when you start to look at housing, if housing is cheap enough, they will do a drive to qualify, as we call it. So again, you have employment over in Springfield and every town like Windsor, there's chances that you can capitalize on the growth of the surrounding areas and bringing that into Granby, which would help strengthen Granby Center itself. Community engagement, and this is where I think you can really lean into the local businesses. You have a great sort of village center already, and that charm that you have it's great. Like I said, everything's there. The ice cream shop, in fact, you have 2 ice cream shops and everything else. That's amazing. That is something you can really lean into about that small town charm that you have, and as you try to attract those businesses, why we're doing successfully here. The problem with that, though, is that limited foot traffic in the area, and hopefully we'll be able to solve that, because ideally a park once and you can move around easily, that is comfortable and inviting, but that has that safety aspect to it, goes a long way. The other thing is collaborating with the regional strategies and really aligning from the POCD, the economic infrastructure goals, and laying that out as you look at how you do the phasing for everything within Granby Center. Lastly, or the last 2 things I want to talk about is really impacts on school. Looking at the studies, moderate house growth, it's really not going to strain your schools. There's been a decrease, and this is one of the things we've come across in a lot of communities going, oh my God, if you put in 200 units or 300 units, you're going to overwhelm your schools. One of the things that most people don't realize is my wife's a teacher. She's under a contract with the school district to look at classroom size. That actually dictates everything. And most people don't realize that. They just go, I have 500 students in there, it costs this much money per student. Well, that's actually incorrect, because you have a gap sometimes. I may have 18 students, but I may have a allowance for a classroom of up to 23 students. So you've got 5 extra students that you can put into each of those classrooms. And so as you start to look at your classrooms all the way from kindergarten to grade 12, there is potential room within them. That's a separate analysis that would need to be done. But like I said, that's one of the things we'll hear when people talk about it. Oh my God, you'll bring all these people in. If you actually check the apartments over at 280, you will find, and we always used to use the Rutgers model, which would dictate how many kids that would come in. We find in a lot of these apartments, it is young professionals now coming in. They don't have a lot of kids. And so like I did a development in Greenberg, it was 457 new apartments. And basically the modeling said we should have about 120 kids in there. We ended up with 33. And that's where these apartments and everything else are set up. It's not, these apartments are really set up for bringing people in and then getting them into housing within the area. And that's where, we have to sort of communicate that out with the community on how this actually works. And then lastly is just the transportation. So again, as you start to look at the retail, the commercial, and residential, how do you enhance those employment hubs? And so if I am working from home, one of the suggestions that we looked at was, potentially, well, Starbucks is now changing, I don't know if you heard that, but they're trying to bring more people back into sort of work there, ceramic mugs and everything else. We want people to come work from home. But ideally what you would have is some type of workplace that is, co-working or something like that has potential in the area, that I don't have to work at home, but I can go collaborate with people around me, or I'm close enough to a coffee shop that I can set things up. So again, when you look at that, is the transportation links that will allow people to come in, but really to keep that small town character, because we don't want to lose that. And then, my last one.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's some of the initial recommendations, and again, this is why we put it in draft. We wanted sort of feedback.
We need to go to the next slide.
Next slide.
Next slide, yeah.
So again, this is just initial recommendations. These are not final recommendations. Okay. So again, key action for growth, retail, fill the vacancies with unique community-focused businesses. One of the things we heard from the owners was hosting cultural events to sort of drive engagement. But also, this is where, again, you can bring people from the outside, may never have been to Granby Center, to say, we've got these cultural events that are happening here. One of the things they talked about was the flea market, the number of people that come in. But I would go a little bit different, because if you do a special services district, one of the things that they do is they plan out events and things like that, then you can start to get into a regular calendar that people know to come to. Commercial side of it, encourage that mixed-use development, update zoning regulations for that flexibility, track the professional and wellness services. Again, lean into what you're already good at, as opposed to trying to create a whole new category in there. All right. Residential, again, affordable housing, incentives, targeted policies. But really, you want your rental options for your own professionals, but also your downsizing seniors. So if I want to get out of my 4 or 5 bedroom house because my kids are gone, I'm, now in my 70s, and I just can't take care of this building anymore, but I don't want to leave. Okay? We got to be able to provide some of that option for people to come in here and then be able to move into those downsizing seniors. And then lastly is just that commission. So again, sewer, water, you got to have that analysis done as part of any type of building, and then the natural gas. And then sort of moving forward, next steps, next slide. It's really just sort of developing, potential new zone for the center. I'm going to put an appendix in the final study of just how to do a targeted marketing campaign to attract businesses in residential, and how you would work with the real estate agents on that. And then as well, as we start to finalize everything, engage stakeholders for feedback on how we're going to do this. And then really to give you, like every comprehensive plan, is how do you monitor your progress and adapt the strategies over the next 2 to 3 years? So how do you keep circling back, checking, does this work, or does this not work, and then start to make those adjustments. So that is where we are right now, and I'm happy to answer any questions I have.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Tom. Questions, comments? John, Eric, Abby?
Very comprehensive.
And as you read through the market study, if you have any further, questions, comments, feel free to send them to
Please.
Abby.
Yeah.
And then we'll get them prior to the next meeting, because as I mentioned, we're going to gradually, based on the market analysis, existing conditions, which Thomas has sort of summarized, we'll, in the next 2 meetings, sort of move now to strategies, design ideas for the center, and zoning ideas for the.
Yeah. Yeah, one, or just a couple small comments that I had with respect to the document, the market analysis and regional development trends.
Yes.
Which obviously what you just presented is based on this work here. Some things seemed slightly dated with respect to like Windsor and Hartford.
Some of
where
it's
you
the
pointed
data
out-
that I have, so.
Okay, yeah, so we might want to update that just a little bit for the final draft, because you do, some of the things that you reference are also things that are vacant.
Yeah.
So one is, Voya Financial in Windsor. Now, they still may have a big presence here in the area, working from home or whatever, but that 400,000 square foot building or whatever it is vacant.
I have a map that I put together on that one, just to grab some of those major vacancies that you'll be able to see. Like I said, I didn't include it, I just gave you the quick write-up, but I have several maps that we've developed, as well as a bunch of tables that will be put into this as well. So,
Okay. So yeah, with Windsor and, in Hartford, you have, the aerospace industry, which, there's a lot of people, I know you quoted it as, the insurance capital of the world. Okay, we'll take it. But again, it's slightly dated because there's other things, industries that are in Hartford that, sorry, I didn't mean to say that in front of you. Insurance.
Well, I go by what, I talk to DCD all the time, and that's what their quote all the time, it's the insurance.
Right.
So-
Yeah, no, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But there are other industries that are quite, that employ a lot of people. Same with the healthcare industry. That was actually has kind of migrated actually towards us in the suburbs. You see, UConn, Hartford Hospital, St. Francis, kind of all at our doorstep here in Farmington, centered around, their clinical operations are all around us here at the UConn Health Center, which.
No, that's a great
Which is-
point. I'll add that in.
Okay, so that was just my couple little points on
What's interesting is
recent
we
data.
just finished up East Hartford's plan and we looked at part of the redevelopment around the waterfront that we were actually talking to
Yeah.
basically Pratt Whitney. They're bringing everybody back to 5 So I suspect we'll see people either moving back into the area that moved away.
Right.
And so again, there's unique opportunities to
Yeah.
look at. So.
So same on the education side. I mean, I think you cited UConn, but I mean, we have the University of Hartford, we have Trinity, we have University of St. Joseph's. So, I mean, there's a pretty big.
I
pretty
can
big-
add those in.
Yeah, pretty big presence.
There's a
so,
change. It's no longer college, St. Joseph's College.
Not
University of
St.
St. Joseph's.
Right,
Yeah.
so. All right, should we,
Should we switch to Abby? Oh, sorry.
No.
no,
So I think Abby shared my marked up document.
Yeah.
And I appreciate whatever feedback that you, and I understand I understand what a comparative is. I understand why, from your illustration, Windsor was included in the comparative. But all the things that drove change in Windsor, A, were not their village center, and B,
Yeah.
do not exist here and never will exist here.
No, right. And
So
that's
using it
right.
as a comparative is not.
No, I
a
saw your
comparative.
comments,
Yeah.
and I think the only reason for discussing Windsor is what's happening that the marketplace has already accommodated in Windsor. It's not coming here.
Yeah.
Those things are not coming here, but we need to be clear on
The
that.
only thing that you may be having, and again, talking to the real estate agents, was the housing side and everything. As people, if you're not building enough housing, people will migrate to where they can get housing. And you have a really nice roadway system to get over there.
So, since you mentioned housing, there's two things that I think, at least one that I think it could be illustrative, is there's a fair bit of current academic research that has looked at younger generations of adults wanting to rent rather than buy.
Yeah.
And for a very long time, for a variety of reasons, and whether we believe that to be true or whatever, I'm not, I agree that the idea, I think of all of our ideas, the rental is like, I'm going to rent for a while and I'm going to try to find a place to buy. I'm not sure that that's a completely valid premise anymore because of changes in the way the universe is shaped. The other thing, and I'm sure your data from your project is spot on, but I've also seen in other communities, West Hartford, Glastonbury, where similarly, again, gross generalization.
Yeah.
Similar to Granby, a young family cannot afford to buy a house in those communities, but they can't afford to rent. And they're going, I can't buy a house there, but I can rent there so I can have my kids in that school system.
Yes.
So that provides a driver of young families to rental properties, whether it's whatever shape that they are, because the point of entry is easier for them. So that does lead, and I think you can look at Glastonbury and West Hartford and what that, and West Hartford's a little different. Glastonbury has had that experience.
If you want, I can actually put a table, because I used to do this in Stanford all the time, was what paying in rent would actually equate to a mortgage.
Mortgage payment.
And so, it was interesting in Stanford because the payments that people were complaining about, how expensive it was, could not even get you into a starter home at $600,000. But at $2,500, I could get a 2-bedroom to 3-bedroom apartment that would get me in the door. And then I used to do.
Absolutely.
And then if you were to save that extra money, it actually works into a down payment system.
It's also the unique kind of pivot where the value of time, right? It's all what all of us did to shingle a roof and paint a house and mow lawns. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to have my free time. So that makes the rental opportunity that much
And I
more
think that's
intriguing.
where there's some opportunity for rental
Yeah.
in the center.
I was intrigued, and I don't want to belabor the point, I was intrigued in one of your early statements and repeated in the presentation that the vacancies in the center area are priced at or under the rest of,
They're close to the surrounding areas.
which is really, it's intriguing and it's good to know, but then that begs the question, well, then why are they empty? So I'm curious, in your experience, is that a marketing thing? Is that an awareness thing? Like, people just don't think of Granby when it's like,
Yeah.
I want to go rent an office space or I want to open a business?
And that's why I made the suggestion of putting together a marketing plan specifically for Granby. And so that way you have something on your website, these are the vacancies, you work with your local property owners and real estate agents. And you say, we've got stuff available. You start to put together a fact sheet of here's our income, population, our draw area, things like that. And so that way, Granby may not be on anybody's radar or some of the radars, but as soon as you start to put that information out there, all of a sudden you start that marketing campaign to bring people in. And so again, with the mom and pop or a national, if they don't know about you, they don't know about you.
That's right.
But you have a Starbucks here. That is absolutely key. If you've got a Starbucks, that's one of the things you actually advertise. The nationals, here it is. Now, the thing is, you need to decide as part of your redevelopment or zoning, do you want to go that way? Or do you want to keep the mom and pop side of it? So, again,
Still be a marketing program, but tailored to a different
yeah,
app.
a little bit different. So again, like Stamford, we don't have a lot of national chains. It is all, like, our restaurants are all mom and pop and, family restaurants, things like that. I think we have 2 McDonald's and a Burger King. But I don't have like an Applebee's or a Fridays or an Outback or any of that other stuff that as you go north up to New Haven into those strip centers that cater to that stuff. Stanford's very particular about making sure that we have that sort of nationality side of everything, but we have that local aspect for, when we're going out.
But maybe some combination in the
Yeah.
center, both the mom and pops that
Yeah,
want
and the
to
nationals.
purge to stay, and some nationals.
It sort of exists currently.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
like
exactly.
CVS.
That's right, you just reinforce them.
Yep.
And 2 last things, and I'll shut up. Intrigued when you mentioned developers supporting infrastructure costs. Have you, in your experience of whether that's a requirement, an ask, or whatever, have you found it to be a deterrent and anybody going like, I'm going to either build here or here, these people want me to pony up some cash for water and sewer in this place, I can just drop it on a lot that's ready to go?
Well, it all depends on how you structure that exaction. So it may be I do a phase-in of taxes for evaluation in order to help them pay for that improvement. Like I said, there's lots of different ways to take that exaction out of there. But it's a discussion that the board will have to have if they're willing to move forward with something like that. Again, I don't want to take anything off the table. I think all options should be on the table, because otherwise, say I have a developer comes in, builds some additional housing units, and that puts you over on the system. Well, now it goes back on all the taxpayers as opposed to, his incremental portion. So,
It's your fault.
yeah, but it may be a case, like I said, we've had developers pay for a new traffic light, but a portion of the traffic light, their portion goes into a reserve fund within the town itself, and sort of waiting until all that development happens there. Everyone puts their money together to pay for it.
Despite what sometimes what it feels like, there's no real delineation between the economic center and shopping and usage and gas and stuff like that in Southwick is a significant. I noticed there wasn't a lot of conversation about what that, because Southwick is the next town over in Massachusetts and it has an impact. A lot of people in Granby shop there.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Granby go there and stuff like that. But there
Big
wasn't-
Y and-
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of contemplation in like how that fits into the mix and whether there's a compared to there as well? I understand it's different states, so it's different rules, different platforms.
Again, part of it is where do people actually go? And like I said, that's why I'm saying it's about a 20-mile radius, right? A map of here's where everything is in a 20-mile radius. That's typically where people will link themselves to. Most of the time, it's down to a 5 to a 1 mile radius is what you look at. But if you have a specialty service that you cannot get anywhere else, people will drive for that.
But we think it is primarily a local market,
Yeah.
so. Okay. Well, you had suggested earlier that maybe Abby give as an introduction to the, before we go to item 4 and 5 here.
Yes.
She give an introduction on what you're doing.
And maybe Eric, since you're on planning and zoning, want to talk a little bit about what's going on?
Do you want me to? Okay. So planning and zoning, they've been going through the regulations, just cleaning up, so very minor changes, fixing cross-references, removing sections that are no longer applicable, zones that have been long removed, but the regulations still lived. But in doing so, there was some discussion about the Granby Center area specifically. A question came up about one use in particular, the neighborhood retirement zone, was it, Eric? Neighborhood retirement housing.
Senior housing.
Yeah, and some other uses within Granby Center. And when the commission started to look at some of them in more detail, some of them just don't make sense anymore. They're not defined. So I think just overall ask of this process would be, I know you're going to be looking at lot sizes and, some of your bulk standards, if you will, but also just recommendations in general about the uses. And I think overall just simplifying all of this. It's also confusing, if you have a multifamily use called out and then you have mixed use, can you have a mixed use that includes 3 units, but would that also be considered multifamily, which wouldn't be allowed under the current regulation? So there's just a lot of, I think, opportunity for some cleanup here. So definitely would appreciate outside eyes on our uses here and opportunities to make it a little bit simpler to apply
Yeah, so
and
agree.
interpret.
And I was pleased to see the feedback that you obtained from some of the landowner session.
Yeah,
It seemed to be in support of simplification of the center zone, the 3 zones being confusing, and in some instances conflicting. Simplification. Abby mentioned the housing. There is available vacant buildings, not commercial buildings, that are currently situated in a way in the center edge zone that they can only be used as single family. And some of them, I'm sure you've seen during your tours, they're rotting, falling down, they're deteriorating. It is problems like that used in conjunction with other types of housing stock. We've got a few complexes, you pointed out, now more apartment-based, but I also think there's a gap in multifamily, whether you call it multifamily or whatnot, where people might like from a rental perspective, but to be on a piece of property that has some green space. And apartment living doesn't afford that. You're down hallways in an apartment. So the ability to rent, I think, makes a huge difference. But we're at a little bit of a crossroads. Last night, we had a planning and zoning meeting, and this concept that was in the code about, as Abby said, retirement housing, senior housing, or whatnot, we either need to take it out or we need to, as part of this process, make recommendations to clean it up in conjunction with zone simplification.
Yeah, good. Well, actually, we've started ourselves, well, we'll finish is that, because we've started it, we've got some questions for you, actually. Jonathan and Suzanne, feel free here to jump in, but we've done a list of zoning ideas. And then what Suzanne has put together is just, you've seen these, you know these better than we do, but to understand the zoning, we tried to do a schedule, what I call an area and bulk schedule for ourselves. Although, I'm sorry, I didn't see any sense, did I? Sorry. So the first page, you all know, the zoning, although the very first page, we've had an internal discussion, just an internal discussion ourselves, picking up on an idea mentioned to us, whether there should be one zone. We think we need to look at it a little bit, because the key element here is that residential doesn't seem to us, residential is a special permit within the center. So there's a little bit of a difference here. And we certainly want residential as a mixed-use building, as a mixed-use component, to be something that, you know, we want people to do. So it could be one zone, but on the other hand, we're thinking too, in a way, the outer perimeter, by the one zone, if we went to a two-zone approach, it might be just the pink within this area between the highways, because it's got a different character a little bit. Even though, as soon as you cross the street, there's bigger lots, there's bigger sizes. And so there's an argument here, though, that the two-zone approach might be something we haven't come up with a clear-cut recommendation yet there. We're starting to just, we wanted to throw out ideas to you tonight, because with Jonathan here, and we're going to be looking at the next meeting, trying to come in on sort of design ideas, and
Right. The timing of all this is good because
it's perfect, yeah.
we're tipping our toes in the water here
We're
with what
getting
Abby
into
is
it, yeah.
doing. P&Z is looking at it. So sometimes the biggest challenge is just getting the attention of the whole thing going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So this is perfect. for-
I know, as you look at our handout, what we've done is an area and bulk schedule, which you're used to.
Right.
But I sort of, it's kind of just what Abby kind of mentioned, these uses. So Suzanne put together this, I would call a use schedule. What are the uses? Who's allowed by special permit, that type of thing. I don't mean to get into this discussion in detail tonight, but we started looking at it ourselves. And because where we're going, we think, given your current POCD, the market findings, are leaning toward the reaction from the owners, property owners, is mixed use makes sense. With mixed use, you can utilize parking better, you can get a hopefully good sidewalk, walkway kind of system, connecting things, and you get more vitality, you get more use of the area. And I'm just saying mixed use at a relatively smaller scale, and I think Jonathan will be able to show you at the next meeting some comparables of what we mean.
Right, 'cause, yeah, we're looking at some properties in the center that could easily adapt to a mixed use, especially with some modifications and some developments to what's already existing. So for example, if you took 10 Hartford Avenue, picture that with a second floor on it, all the way around. That's the one Starbucks
Right.
going on. I mean, I'm
Right.
just throwing that out as an example.
That's right. Yeah.
So, yes, that's where, mixed use and looking at these various uses under what's permitted, what's special, it just makes a lot of sense for simplification with the whole driver towards a mixed-use concept.
And one of our approaches to zoning, sometimes you see, the classic to me was in a Dutchess County over in Mid-Hudson, New York State. I never forgot it. They define things so in such a detailed way that they're out of date on them.
Yeah.
20 years later, there were words in zoning that I had to ask, what does this actually mean? And we have tended usually to go in a more general, for instance, retail. Most people don't understand the word. Instead of defining the 15 uses of retail, just to have more general use categories, rather than trying to define everything. Now, I don't know where you're going, so that's where we've been recently in a lot of our zoning work. And also trying to be, while we're being a little more general in the use category and trying to allow mixed uses in the building, we're trying to then get into a little bit more design, which Jonathan will get into. I'm not saying a form-based code necessarily, but design guidelines, design standards for the zoning, but with a mixture of uses and basically use categories that are fairly broad and adaptable and flexible. I don't know how the P and Z.
But we have some.
Yeah.
There was a discussion when you were talking about lighting, for example, there was commentary on lighting. We actually do have a lighting standard. However, it's new-ish. And the town center's old, so it has a mix of lighting. And
Yeah.
we're unable to force everybody to tear down all their lighting and put a new lighting standard
Lighting,
in. So
yeah.
that's the predicament that we're in. That talks about how we incentivize the landowners somehow to spend that money. If they've commented, which it seems they did, that the lighting is inconsistent, well, the return question is, well, will you change your lighting?
Well, that's right. And that, I would say in honesty, we didn't get to that point.
Right. Well,
At that point-
they opened the door, so that's the
They
return
did open
question.
the door. That's the return question, yeah. So,
And if we have recommendations for a historic-looking building, most of the buildings that those landowners own are not historic-looking, so
Correct.
will they make them historic?
yeah, that's the issue of your prior uses that are in place. And you've got it's not unusual for us. I mean, we just finished a lot of work in, I know it's not a community, but every community is unique. This was Wilton, Connecticut, where, in a way, it's a beautiful town. It's a nice center. But it looks to us, when we started the work, it was isolated suburban development in one place, isolated in the next place. Nothing was united with streets. And it could be better. We did a whole landscape plan for it. And so this strikes me a little, you're smaller than Wilton Center, so everything's unique, so we have to adapt to this sense of place. We think it's, though, that mixed use well responds to the market. So actually getting in here development that will be fairly predictable in terms of the design guidelines, but fairly flexible in terms of all the uses that could go in. And then, we haven't gotten to this yet, but the efficiency or the predictability of it. In other words, the ability to get through the approvals process in a that's always it's always sometimes an issue, but where you have relatively, in Wilton, for instance, I don't mind saying this, they would agree themselves, I think, that, they had a certain reputation that they were difficult. Now, that doesn't mean the developers aren't going to be there if there's a market, but the individual property owner that they want to do something, they realize it costs a little bit of money. So the more predictability we can get into that process, the better off it is.
Yep.
But there's just a little checklist here, which, the first step point, you can see, allow for residential flexibility, that's the market, we think, in a way. We've mentioned lower minimum parking standards, but that's tied to creating shared parking and undesignated parking in order to do that, because you do need enough parking. You can't just, like, if we had another successful restaurant or a successful business right here, this was unusual time. I don't know, maybe it wasn't unusual time. I mean, we've now been to the same restaurant a couple of times, and he couldn't get a parking spot. I got probably there were 3 parking spots left. And this is at, I don't know, 5:30 on a January cold night. Not peak, so not unusual, yeah.
So knowing that's an issue, though, talking about the flexibility of this zoning commission versus others, we are very flexible. In fact, to help mitigate that parking, we recently approved, there was a joint project by 3 property owners to,
This, yeah, this is the one that's connecting, yeah.
Yeah.
See that.
and it,
Connection.
right, to connect 3
We
properties.
saw that.
Going to lose a little bit of grass, but it's designed to alleviate the parking situation that you're referring to, among parking situations for others.
Yeah.
So there is flexibility there to help
Yeah, and we
solve.
think the ability to maybe build in some incentives to the zoning so that people, we can get more easements for sidewalks through different properties and also get interconnected, which we're doing, interconnected parking so that it can be parking that, works, it can be shared by everybody.
Yes.
So that whole concept that Thomas mentioned, again, we've mentioned before, you can park once and then walk around, rather than, you go to the post office and you park there, and then you go, next door and you're driving there, and then you could walk. Now, I'm not saying that works all the time, because if you're going purely grocery shopping, yeah, then you're gonna park. So, but at any rate, we also, our third dot point is if we could implement, I hate the word access management because it doesn't mean anything to people, but what it means is, and you know this at P and Z, where you can get interconnected driveways in the back, then you need less curb cuts in the front. And I use Route 20 as an example. You got a light at the road in front of the shopping, in front of the grocery store. But then you have curb cuts down as you get closer to the light. Those curb cuts, you don't want any more curb cuts, probably, because those curb cuts are pretty tough in peak hour to get out safely. So you do want, if you have, the more interconnections you can have on parking lots, the more people can go to the light, and rather than come out on multiple curb cuts, because on Route 20 at peak hour, that can be,
Even on not peak hours.
Not even not peak. It can be tough.
It is hard.
Yeah.
If you're going counter, like if you're going.
Yeah, you
across
gotta be a
lanes,
little
it is
careful.
incredibly difficult.
so that's why I was interested to see, I shouldn't side, but something that came before you that you sent us, because I was interested in seeing it. And that's the subdivision. I guess you didn't, not a subdivision, just multifamily housing, north side of Route 20, off of,
Yeah, this was the
Oh, the-
corner of Hungary and East Granby Road.
I always get the one that's,
Workforce housing.
Yeah.
yeah, I was interested in those road cuts, how you got in and how you get out of there. There's, if that ever came in again, I'd certainly get I'd certainly get a setback on where that one house is from. How do you pronounce it?
Hungary.
Hungary.
Hungary. Hungary. I'll get it one of these days. Yeah, I keep saying Hungary, right? So, but if that ever came in again, I could see where you could make.
It's not currently in approved use.
Yeah, it's not, yeah. So, but then, this is the tough one we want to get at. We've got to get some easements to get a good sidewalk system completely connected all through the area. We need easements from the property owners, I think. And then, of course, the question is who pays for those
And then
sidewalks
who maintains them and shovels
and
them?
maintains them. Usually, when you do a subdivision or you have your people coming in, most of the municipalities, there's shoveling, that type of thing is up to the property owner, up to the property owner who might designate that to the tenants. But the initial cost of putting it in is usually a developer. But in this case, it may be a combination of the developer and the town being able to connect, or, as Thomas mentioned, a developer coming in, paying for his front door uses and maybe into a fund that would extend those sidewalks to the neighbor, or the neighbors paying it.
Setting aside the maintenance of the sidewalks, I do believe sidewalks are an area that is rich for grants and state.
Yes, right now they are.
So a lot of our newer sidewalks are from
Yeah,
grants, so
yeah,
that, I think that is feasible to get
yeah,
somebody to pay for it other than the landowner.
right.
Have you mapped the gaps so we can like
We're,
visually?
one of the things that I'm glad Jonathan's done, one of the things Jonathan's gonna be looking at is different options for property development. Take the Bank of America site, or I know the Bank of America site, maybe we shouldn't take the Bank of America site, but we got some ideas for it.
I meant more for sidewalks only.
Oh,
Like
for
mapping.
sidewalks? Yeah, we'll be able to, we've mapped sidewalks all around here, but not proposals yet and those are coming. And that's why we wanted to discuss these ideas now, because Jonathan's going to develop this for the February 26th meeting, and then hopefully by March 26th, we'll have some design concepts
Okay.
for you, because we want you to see everything before we go to the public workshop, so that we test out at the workshop the concepts that you've already discussed here.
Right.
That's the idea. So, and then we've already discussed decreasing in the heart of the area anyway, the lot size a little bit to enable more of a hamlet setting, a little village kind of setting. Because 30 and 40,000 square foot lot sizes, they may make sense on the outer perimeter, but in the middle, it would be good, I think, to allow somewhat smaller lot sizes.
So then in conjunction with that, all roads lead right back to the parking. Because if you
Right.
reduce the lot sizes, there'll be a lot of places that you travel, especially down at the shore, that have small storefronts just in a row. There has to be municipal
There's
parking
got
or
to
shared
be,
parking.
that's right. So we do have to be careful. We don't want to go down to,
Well, if you add a lot more lots, you're gonna have
yeah, we're gonna have,
parking.
Yes, but curiosity is too, so since we're talking about existing chunks of property that somebody owns.
Yeah.
If you create a mechanism where they could be theoretically smaller lots, from a property owner's perspective, what's the benefit for them because there's not a lot of subdividable,
Well, I think I can add that if you make the lot size smaller, and some of those properties, Bank of America is a large piece of property, can probably be subdivided into 3. That would triple net the current owner's ability to rent.
now, we're not
Yeah,
thinking of something.
actually, the Bank of
Yeah.
America site actually going dark is actually, in my view, is a good thing, because the property was underutilized
Yeah,
for decades.
for decades, yeah.
So.
Now there's an opportunity to
Now,
probably.
right, now there's an opportunity in the larger scheme of things to do something much more beneficial for the town. I mean, that building's been there since 1960 or 61, so it's been there for many years on that same basic footprint. So there is
and it's
opportunity.
always been a bank here, 100% right, like it would, it's hard to make that into anything. other than-
Yes, as Thomas mentioned, it's,
Possible.
Yeah.
but
Get bulldozed.
it might. And if it does, we'd like to have some sketches and,
Right.
ideas for it.
And I imagine that the current owners are well aware that building is not of much use. And I think they have their arms wrapped fully around it being torn down.
And well, their representative was here he was here, and he told us that, yeah, they're looking at that site. You know,
Yeah.
what could be a potential there, but he didn't get into any
Right.
detail. But
So in the essence of time,
Yes,
I know it's
let's-
starting to get
Yep.
late.
Yeah, it is.
Did,
We should.
anything that Jonathan and Suzanne want to add into zoning before we really get
I think-
into it next month?
Actually, I think we were done, yeah.
Okay.
Except for Jonathan or Suzanne, anything else?
No, I think we covered it. It is getting late. Maybe we'll go into some, for example, get down and we talk about some of these other things about what are the implications of, smaller lot sizes or reducing front yard setbacks. I think we can show some of that and maybe some of the benefits for consideration next time we meet, when I can bring some drawings about that. We've already started looking at some of these sites, and to answer the earlier question, yes, we've already mapped where the sidewalks are in good condition and in place, and then where the gaps are, so we have that documented.
Great. Okay.
Right.
Good. All right, so to move on to the next agenda items, discuss April public meeting. I think we probably can talk more. Is there anything else? I'm sorry. We probably can get into that a little bit more next month.
Yeah.
As far as the,
Yeah, it's a
we're a
little
couple
bit out
months
there,
out.
but I just want to remind everybody.
Right,
That's what we're aiming for, get everything
And
set.
you mentioned the 3rd, right? That's
Yeah,
the
April
target?
3rd is
Okay.
the date for the workshop.
Okay.
And we can talk on February 28th about publicity for that.
Okay, great. The next item on our list, and I don't know if you have our agenda list, but maybe a portion of it. Item number 5, discuss how the information and input received from workshops and public outreach is tracked, responded to, and incorporated into the plan. And I think Suzanne started touching upon that
Exactly.
earlier.
Yeah.
So, yes, how that's going to be documented, how it's footnoted. And actually, it's all sources within, the master plan, how you look at, how you document and footnote municipal information that you receive, state, federal.
Right.
I mean, it's all, and how all that blended information gets noted within your report, obviously will be important. So, and that we can maybe touch upon a little bit more next month also. All right, action items for the next meeting. I think a lot of it we touched upon with respect to zoning. Is there anything else for the next meeting that we feel we
One
need
thing
to?
that dovetails well with that, and actually, between Abby and two, and philosophically, you look at that and the idea of the single zone makes sense, because even for somebody that spent a lot of time looking at the 3 different ones, become incredibly confusing. Is there written down, do we recall philosophically why that was the pathway taken when they were done, to see if there's, just to make sure that we're not screwing something up?
We've talked about it at length as to why it was done, and we believe it was done with good intentions for the time period in which it was done, but it has grown dated.
And I'm sure it absolutely was, but if there was, like, we want to achieve, since we throw around the word strategy a lot, if we want to strategically, at the time, we wanted to achieve X, Y, and Z, it would probably be helpful, as if that gets blown up, to understand what those points were, just to make sure that we're not.
Yeah, that's probably a good point. So just looking at a little bit from a historical perspective, if we want to try to dig into 2006, 2005, 2006, and what kind of the reasoning that we had behind breaking out 3 separate zones within the center,
Yeah, for
might be useful.
yeah, I can take a look at the file and for the next meeting, do a quick overview based on what I found.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. All right, now we get to number 7, public session. Thank you for the public for being patient. And is there anyone on Zoom?
I just had a couple questions.
Just to, yeah, come on up, since we don't have a podium and a microphone.
Podium, and I always ask everyone to speak up more for those of
And
the
just for the
public
record,
who
if you
listen
could
all the
just-
time. I'm Kate Bogley, 192 of 198 R Salmon Brook Street, so I live at the south end of the center edge zone. I think you answered the question, do you have suggestions for mentorship for how the town goes about getting businesses for these redevelopment? So it sounds like you're gonna, I think that question was already answered.
Yes.
My interest was piqued several meetings ago when you said there was opportunity to levy a tax, or maybe that's not the right word, on vacant properties in town to, it's in a sense, incentivize them to rent the properties.
So, yeah, I did talk a little about that. Other municipalities have basically put forward legislation that is an increase in taxes. And so basically it's like a fine on vacant property where if they don't develop within a year, then they get additional fines. Sort of. And so, we were talking, I think I used the city of Hudson was one of the examples.
Or we're in a
Yeah.
Hudson River Library.
Yeah, and so basically they have a tax that they put on vacant properties to encourage. Stanford was doing the same thing. It was to spur people to get together and start, actually doing something.
That would be great. Can we do that
But
tomorrow?
it is very, well, you have to be very careful on how you approach this and how you write this up and why you would do it.
Yeah.
I don't believe we are at that stage yet. I think we need to work through a little bit more of the market analysis as well as that redevelopment plan.
Well, the other thing here, we need to keep in mind too, we're studying one small part of the town.
Yeah.
And some of these things we're talking about, like this one, really probably should be a townwide,
Yeah.
Example. Otherwise, to do something just in one district, well, I
Could
would
be
just talk to your
arbitrary and
attorney
capricious.
before doing that.
Oh,
There's
I
an
see.
equal
Yeah.
protection
Yeah.
argument there. that-
Well, there's blighted properties throughout.
But it's interesting
Yes,
that you
that's
say maybe a year would be a reasonable, we have properties that have been vacant for 20 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the time is now to
Right.
act.
What
We
I'm saying
can't
though
always-
is I think that one is a town-wide issue, that is not just the Granby Center issue. In
Okay.
other words, we should not do that in this plan for Granby Center
Yeah.
without, because the argument that a good attorney would make, wait a minute, you're discriminating against us in this one zone. This should be town-wide.
Okay, that's
And
good.
I'll defer, I would be the first to defer to your town attorney on it.
Okay,
I see
that's
slight
fair.
differences between commercial and residential, but certainly
Oh,
needs to be
yeah.
taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Why is Simsbury drawing from a larger area than Granby is?
Just in terms of location and population, that's basically when you look at the zoning and where they've now set up the malls and everything else, like the shopping centers, stuff like that, it's just their draw area, that's all.
Simsbury's got
So
a,
the town is 4 times the size of ours, so that's.
yours, and it
why-
also
yeah.
has in honesty, it has a very, very good reputation,
Yeah.
as you know. And it draws people, for instance, when we were working a long time ago, just the Simsbury Inn and then Marriott Homes Inn. It's got a cachet to it that is a little bit better known.
Okay, so that leads me to my last question, which is a question I think I asked of this committee when they first started, before you were involved, is do you think it's beneficial to the town to draw people from the outside of town? I think there are some different camps in town who think, no, the center should just serve the people in Granby and that's it. It should be very quiet. And then there are other people who say, no, I mean, when I first moved here, the only option for going out to eat was pizza. I like going to restaurants, real restaurants, and I think it should be nice to walk around, and I would like to stay in Granby to do things. So where are you kind of
I
pushing?
think in a place like this, in this center, this center ought to serve primarily the people here in Granby. Your prime area is that 5-mile radius, which Thomas mentioned. That doesn't say you couldn't attract from,
So-
other areas, but you are unlikely to attract from southern Simsbury or Avon.
This is where your special events
Yeah.
come into play. So on weekends and stuff like that is to bring additional people in. But you still have to be able to service your regular market Monday through Friday. So
Right.
you have to have enough density and enough people and services to service or to make sure those businesses are successful. Sort of, as we say, the sprinkles and the icing on top of that cupcake is that extra people now come in on the weekends and say, oh, we're going to make a nice little trip, go grab brunch in Granby, or we're going to go do a little shopping or something like that. So that's part of what we look at.
Yeah, I think it's no
Two
secret
towns.
that I think that in order for businesses to survive in this center, we have to draw people from Granby.
You do.
I think
From
that would be an
outside.
interesting thread to pull, and I apologize for interrupting.
No, please.
Interesting thread to pull
during the listening session in April. I think
Yes, yeah, that's a good
To
point.
kind of, to flesh that out a
We
little bit
can-
more,
yeah.
because you have to have, 100% right, you have to have enough business to sustain the everyday, and that may or may not be the population of the town of Granby.
Correct. So, I always talked about it when I was director of economic development in Stanford, was we actually broke it down by hours. So you had the daytime population, do you have enough office workers there to go shopping and do restaurants from that 9 to 5? Then with the apartments coming, we built almost 15,000 apartments. Now we had a population from 5 to 9 o'clock who then would service the restaurants and go out and do additional shopping. And then you had the nightlife, so people are now coming into Stanford for that nightlife aspect of it. So I don't think Granby's at that point where you're turning into a 15
I was gonna say, how does that
18-hour day.
scale?
You are more into, here's your noon to 7 o'clock, and then on the weekends, which will get stretched out a little bit longer. But, the thing is, you have to be careful, as you become more and more successful, that brings more and more traffic, that brings your parking, that brings all the stuff that we are trying to address to make sure that these properties are successful in the long run. So,
And it also kind of relates to the other things that Granby has to offer, where we want to draw from the outside.
Yeah.
Our rails to trail portion, our hiking trails, our Granby Land Trust that has, a lot of land, and we have, some great recreational spots here in Granby, so anyways.
Yeah.
Peggy?
Peggy LaRoe from Reed Hill Road, formerly a Center resident. So actually, I thought Kate's point was very well taken, that there are 2 camps in town. And I'm definitely more of the camp to serve this community, to draw in the number of people you need. And in line with that, as you look at this notion of mixed unit and mixed retail, mixed use areas, I think it's a great idea to add some housing. You've got a tiny footprint, and you guys are more creative about how to use small properties. But I was concerned when you focused on young professionals for that mixed-use area. It may have just been a passing reference, but I want to see us work back toward diversity economically in our population. And I would like to think there's room for blue-collar people and tradesmen and teachers. Well, teachers are professional, but I would like to see if the focus in Granby generally to improve housing opportunities for lots of people. So the second part of that is whether there's a way to incorporate in your analysis the sort of bare minimum of development you would like to see in the center that could make us vibrant. We don't have to be the most vibrant, but I would like to see, as you do the analysis, thinking about what's good enough versus what the ideal might be. We've got a tiny footprint, and I think we're more constrained than we may be willing to admit. So let's say you had continued vacancies in some buildings, and looking at that as a 10-year projection, what could we tolerate economically before we became the empty storefronts that we hate to see in other communities? It might be that we'll never have full occupancy there, or maybe the time target is like 15 years to get back to the point. But I don't really want to try to be drawing in lots of more residents. I don't want to keep people out, but that's not my goal. My goal would not be to increase our population. It would be to increase the usability of that space for the people we have, plus some, just modest, plus some. So thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
Okay.
I appreciate the idea of incrementalism, because it's one of those things, like, how do you know when you get someplace, let's do it a little bit at a time.
All right. Anyone else? There's no one else on Zoom, right? No. Okay, great, thank you. So the only other thing that we missed, or just to touch upon again, is February 26th is our target date for our next meeting? I know Mark and Meg aren't here, and I know sometimes, we usually check our calendars, but
Yeah,
26th looks good. Okay. I think I'm,
By the way, at our last meeting, I think what we at least jotted down, it's worth my repeating, I make sure I get it right. February 26th, March 26th, and then the April 3rd workshop.
okay.
That's the next 3 dates we had. Suzanne,
Great.
correct me on that if we're, that's what I had. For our next 3 dates.
That's what I-
Yeah, okay.
That's what I'm saying.
26, 26, and 3. Okay.
Yep, that's
Yep.
correct.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks. Good
That was
night.
a very decisive motion.